and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And we have lots of very disturbing news from around the world, starting with the fact that one of Cameroon's leading gay and AIDS activists was tortured and murdered in his home.
Terrible story. And another one from Yemen, where a gay man was shot to death by religious militants. We'll give you details on both of those stories.
On the more positive side, the United Kingdom law opening marriage to same-sex couples in England and Wales cleared the House of Lords and became law this week, with the weddings not to begin until the summer of 2014.
Maybe. We don't know for sure yet.
Okay.
The Democratic Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania has announced that she will refuse to defend the state's law limiting marriage to opposite-sex couples in court. A brouhaha is ensuing in Pennsylvania.
You're going to want to stay tuned for a video, about almost a 10-minute video we have of an Ohio gay couple who went to extraordinary lengths to marry in Maryland, complicated by the ALS of one of the partners.
Major League Baseball, our new best friend, is announcing a new program to combat homophobia in the sport.
San Francisco transgender activist Jazzy Collins has died.
And is PEP, post-exposure prophylaxis, available at your local hospital? ACT UP did a demonstration on that this week here in New York. We'll give you those details. But we start in Cameroon.
An activist there, gay activist there, named Eric Ohina Lemembe, was slain in his home in a place called Yaoundé. He was found Monday after being unreachable for 2 days. His neck and feet were broken, and he had been burned with an iron.
On his face, his hands, and his feet.
That's his picture there. Cameroon is exceedingly hostile to gay people. Some people think that there's more persecution there than almost anywhere.
Well, there are literally more arrests for homosexuality in Cameroon every year than in any other country in the world.
Right. Now, Eric worked first as a journalist, and then he was the executive director of something called CAMFAIDS, Campaign for AIDS, I guess.
Cameroon Foundation for AIDS, executive director.
He contributed to a blog called Erasing 76 Crimes, focusing on the 76 countries that still criminalize homosexuality. The penalty for engaging in homosexuality in Cameroon is up to 5 years in prison, and they dish it out there.
Oh, yeah. And he had talked just within the last couple of weeks in opposition publicly to break-ins recently at offices of AIDS organizations or gay organizations. The campaign is quite overt there, and there's a lot of violence against gay people, arrests of gay people, blackmail, torture. He worked with Human Rights Watch to document all this. He was a very well-known figure and a very brave and outspoken figure, and he has now paid the price.
He wrote several chapters of a book on the global AIDS movement, from wrongs to gay rights. Earlier this month, he did speak out against these anti-gay thugs who were fomenting hatred and bigotry, and he said that extended to the highest levels of the government.
Absolutely.
In Cameroon.
He also, he was not without his witty, lighter side. He was known as Princess Erica to his friends.
Because of his nice clothes and his gracious hospitality.
Yeah.
Now, but his allies worry that the police will go through the motions but not arrest any of the perpetrators. Now, the U.S. State Department has condemned this terrible act in the strongest terms, as did President Obama's spokesperson. So it's got their attention, but what a situation over there.
This is not unlike the murder of David Kato in Uganda. It's where it seems to be institutionally based in some way. No evidence of that literally yet, but clearly there is such an institutional bias and and aggressive campaign against LGBT people that it really is life-threatening. And we talk here, and certainly have in the last couple of weeks, about the great triumphs we're celebrating here and in other places around the world, but it behooves us to remember that this is really the state of affairs for a very large part of the world population.
There's a documentary on the documentary circuit called Born This Way, I think it's in San Francisco now, that looks at the underground LGBT community in Cameroon. The filmmakers, and as I said, the filmmakers say it's the most consistent persecutor of LGBT people in the world. Lots of places have laws against it, some even have more severe laws against it, but this is the place where they really are on the stick there about it.
Be careful of Cameroon, and be careful of Yemen, where our other top bad story comes from this week. In a part of the country that is particularly populated by religious militants,
The Lodge province, LAHJ.
a man perceived as gay there was murdered by two men on a motorcycle who had warned him ahead of time, stop being gay, we're coming after you.
His name was Hashim al-Assimi, and he was heading home on Monday, and they ambushed him on motorcycles, I think. They had twice threatened him, saying if he doesn't stop his homosexuality. Now, his friends said that residents in the area did not report the shooting to the police, and security officials discovered the body 2 hours later. The penalty in Yemen is death for homosexuality.
Yes, certainly not for the murderers.
Well, it's always dicey talking about what we can do in the West, to help folks in these situations. We have to listen to them, of course.
Of course.
But you would hope that we could bring some pressure, at least for them to secure justice when this kind of thing is done.
Well, on a slightly milder front, there is a big debate at the moment about how to bring pressure on Russia, where things seem to be going from bad to worse with the adoption of this first city-by-city and now national no promo homo law, which basically says if anything about you is publicly gay, or you're even a friend of gay people publicly, you are subject to arrest, fines, deportation.
Holding hands in the street, certainly participating in a pride parade, participating in a public demonstration. All of this has been criminalized in Russia.
On the grounds that it is bad for the children.
Right, we can't
This
have
is
it.
their excuse. So people are focusing on what to do about this, and one thing that is concerning people is the fact that the Winter Olympic Games are being held in Sochi, Russia, next spring, a resort town in Russia. And there's been a lot of sort of aggressive talk about we should get the United States to boycott the Sochi Olympics, after a bad experience with boycotting the Olympics in Russia 30 years ago.
When they were involved in the Afghan war.
And 4 years later, they boycotted the Olympics in Los Angeles as a retaliation. There's very little appetite for that.
But the thing is, they've already said they're not going to have a gay house at the Olympics.
Pride House,
Pride
yes.
House, yeah.
Yes, and the International Olympic Committee was asked about this, and they issued a statement this week, and their statement couldn't have been more wishy-washy and refusing to take responsibility for any of this. What they said was, well, we of course support the right of all athletes to compete without discrimination on basis of race or gender or sexual orientation, and we will work hard to make sure that happens. And then people said, well, what about this situation in Russia? And they said, well, there are other organizations that are more appropriate to take up political questions like this. And we know this law has been passed, but we don't know whether it's going to take effect or how it will be implemented.
Oh, yes, we do.
Yeah, we do.
So does the IOC get to say whether there's a Pride House, or is that something else? Is that the country, or
I
what?
don't know. I assume they can at least put pressure, very public pressure, to make that happen. And even if they don't have the power to make it happen, you would want them to publicly support that
Here's
idea.
what I want.
Yes.
I want a rainbow flag in the March of Nations.
That'd be nice.
Or at least people carrying rainbow flags who support us throughout the delegations. Let them try to stop that.
Well, this will be interesting.
You need a real visible thing
Well,
there.
you raised this, and there's an out-gay New Zealand speed skater, an ice skater. Blake, I'm not going to pronounce his
Okay,
name
Blake.
correctly.
Blake the speed skater.
SKJELLERUP.
Okay. Work on
Skellerup. He came out in the Olympics in Vancouver because of the Pride House. Because he was sort of isolated and closeted.
Oh, so it makes people homosexual.
Evidently. So he says, as all these athletes say, you know, I don't want to politicize the games.
They want to skate.
Yeah, they want to medal. That's what they've devoted their lives to.
Sure.
But what so he doesn't want to boycott. He's against a boycott. But what he says is he will wear a rainbow pin as he competes, and he urges others to do so, and thus your model of what could
Okay.
happen. Look, I'd like it to be like in World War II in Denmark, when everybody wore a Star of David when they were
Including
talking.
the king.
Yes. So perhaps that's what all the athletes could do at Sochi.
Yes.
And Harvey Firestein's very upset about this.
Oh, my God. He said that what Putin is doing is an anti-gay pogrom. There are only two ways to deal with a tyrant: starve out the rat or destroy him. That's Harvey.
Well, he says, and I haven't read this anywhere else yet, but he says that the next thing the Russians are going to do is remove kids from LGBT parents. That the implications of this whole anti-gay attitude is that if holding hands in public is bad
Sure.
for the children of Russia, then surely you can't allow gay people to raise children.
It used to be allowed in this country in some cases where children were taken away from their own parents. But Putin is already, banning adoptions by countries that welcome gays, essentially.
Exactly.
So it's a logical extension of that.
And the logical extension is also that, say, a divorcing couple is fighting over custody of kids. One person could charge the other with being gay in order to get custody of the kids, whether it's true or not.
Which used to go on here all the time.
There was also
Putin is in political trouble.
Yes.
And this is, and every time he does this,
Classic.
he sees his ratings go up.
Yeah.
Because it's so anti-gay sentiment has gone up in Russia over the last 10 years.
Some of that is due to the resurgence of a right-wing religious movement in Russia. Religion used to be completely off bounds and virtually illegal in Russia during the communist days.
Atheistic communism.
Exactly. But now that religion is having a resurgence there, and particularly a fundamentalist version, Putin is making alliances there.
All right.
Not a pretty picture.
Can we give them some good news?
Sure.
Well, in Colombia, the country, a civil court judge there says gays can marry starting July 24th.
Diego and Juan can get married on July 24th.
So this is like, there was a high court ruling about this over a year ago, and
Yes.
they said the legislature should fix it, and the legislature didn't.
Well, I gave them a deadline of the end of June, I think, by which time same-sex couples had to be able to achieve legal status.
So does this mean now that it's going to go across the country, or is it just this case, or?
I suspect this will be worked out piecemeal in the courts, and eventually we'll get some overriding decision.
Oh, and the Vatican has now banned in law in Vatican City sexual violence, prostitution, possession of child porn as crimes against children. These were not crimes before.
Will they be conducting a little house-by-house search in the homes of
These
all
were
the...
not crimes before. Although I'm glad prostitution wasn't a crime.
Well, before we get to the big news from Britain, another little footnote. The Psychiatric Society of Lebanon has issued a statement, an official statement, that homosexuality is not a mental disease and does not need treatment, because gay people in Lebanon have been mistreated and arrested and charged as sick perverts. So the official Psychiatric Society issued a statement, because there are a lot of, again, there's the ex-gay movement, there's a lot of attempt to both stigmatize and criminalize LGBT people. But the Psychiatric Society of Lebanon is on our side.
But there's persecution continues in the island nation of Jamaica, where the Rastafarian elder there, his name is Ras Aya V, says no to repealing the anti-buggery law there. That's what they call it. He says it goes against African values, which they consider their heritage. Now, Christian leaders there are also blocking the change in the sodomy laws there. But another Rasta leader said he won't join with the churches on this because they oppose decriminalization of ganja.
So many things are implicated when you bring us into the picture. So, some clarification, but still some complexities in Britain.
Well, this week, the House of Lords gave their on a third reading of the bill, said we're going to do it.
you.
We're going to do it. They did make a couple of adjustments, and apparently it was okay with the House of Commons.
Yes, good adjustments. So they all wore pink carnations to the debate.
And they rejected the weakening amendments to this by a 2-to-1 margin. And
Yep.
the Lords has changed. Used to be a very conservative body, but they got rid of a lot of the hereditary
Yes.
peers, so
Yes.
it's more progressive now.
Yes, so they did that, and then it went back to the House of Commons, and they agreed to the changes and said there was some thought that there was going to be parliamentary ping pong between the two of them, but they actually got it done very fast.
Well, the Archbishop of Canterbury was still certainly against it, but his statement was that the bill weakens what exists, and it replaces it with a less good option that is neither equal nor effective. It's very sort of, diplomatic
Wait,
language.
what is weakening?
I don't know. I don't think he wanted to come across as too anti-gay, so he said kind of mushy language. But
Well, I don't know. The right wing here says that us being allowed to marry our partners weakens traditional marriage. So is that what he's saying, or?
I guess so.
don't
And
know.
when he says it's not equal, we're going to get to how it's not equal because
We
it
will
isn't.
in a second.
But his church
Yes.
is not allowed to do these things.
Well, that's on the list. But
Okay.
first, we must thank the Queen,
Oh yes.
who, even though she is, I'm sure, caught up in the fever of when will the baby be born,
And she's defender of the faith.
Exactly.
She's the head of the Church of England.
but she has found time to give her royal assent
Very quickly.
to the marriage law.
Yep, she's got to sign it. And if she doesn't, they chop your head off.
Well, the last time any monarch refused to give their royal assent to a law was 150 years ago.
Yeah, well,
so,
it was Victoria.
I don't know. It was
Had
the
to be.
19th century. Now, remember that this law applies only to England and Wales.
Right, and Scotland is working on theirs.
Yes.
And Northern Ireland is a laggard.
Yeah, don't hold your breath for Northern Ireland, but Scotland may actually put this into effect before England and Wales because there is some question about when this will go into effect, and no one can really figure out why, except that the British seem to be extremely cautious about making sure all the rules and regulations and procedures are in place before they let it go forward. So it may take as long as almost a year.
Wow.
Or civil partnerships, when they were legalized for same-sex couples, took almost a year to go into effect after the law was passed. Or they may decide to do it a little faster. No one's sure yet. It could be a few months. It could be a lot of months.
Right.
We're still waiting on that.
And Peter Tatchell, who has worked for the Equal Love campaign over there, a great gay activist there, points out the 6 ways it's not equal. First of all, your marriage can't be annulled for non-consummation or adultery.
Because they have no definition of how two people of the same gender can consummate a relationship. It's no mystery to any of us. We'd be happy to explain it to you, but they don't want to ask us.
So, and not only the Church of England, but the Church in Wales, it's called, are banned from doing them, even if they want to. Here's the thing. If you're having a religious wedding, so other religions can do it if they want to
Yes.
do it. You're having a religious wedding at a place that shares its premises with other faiths. If all the faiths don't agree, you can't have your wedding there.
Well, of course.
And
That would defile the
and if you're going to
place.
get your inherit a pension from your spouse, if you're same-sex spouse, you can't get it past
Any pension rights that
pre
predate
1988.
25 years seems to be the period.
All right.
For no particular reason.
And no restoration of marriages for trans people whose marriages were annulled. They had to annul their marriages if they were in a heterosexual relationship in order to get the gender change recognition.
Forced to annul.
And as Peter laments, it does not repeal the ban on opposite-sex civil partnerships. Our gay people can still get civil partnerships. But
yes. Although I still remain mystified by the difference. Someone will explain that to me someday. You're going there soon. You can tell me.
I'll ask.
Find out.
I'll try to find out.
What's
well, no,
the difference?
I mean, some of it is that mainly a lot of people don't want to participate in the institution of marriage.
And how do you define the difference?
Well, I mean,
Other than the word. It's the word. That's all you care about.
Some people do care about that.
Well,
And
get over it.
They
that
want a
is
legal
it.
contract, and they don't want something
Marriage
called marriage.
is a legal contract.
And so, what's wrong with some people calling it civil
Call
partnership?
it whatever you want.
Call
but
it
why do you
strawberry
have
jam.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right, let's move back to this country and marriage laws. Well, good news from the Social Security Administration.
Oh, good. What happened?
Well, we've talked about the whole question now on the table in the United States now that the Supreme Court has overruled the Defense of Marriage Act, Section 3, and says that the federal government must recognize legal same-sex marriages for all their purposes.
However, some agencies of the federal government recognize it based on where you were married, and others recognize it based on where you live and whether your state recognizes. And one of those was the Social Security Administration. So what did they do?
The Social Security Administration has now decided that it will take claim applications from same-sex married couples pending the sorting out of the process, the programs, and instructions from the Department of Justice. So they haven't sorted it out.
No.
They haven't made any final decisions, but they are willing to take applications.
Okay, here's the question. Is
Yeah.
it statutory or is it regulatory?
I don't know.
That's the question in often cases. That's why
Yes.
legally married same-sex
Yes.
couples in New York, before we actually legalized it, they were recognized here except for tax purposes because it was statutory. Okay, let's update folks on the Prop 8 case. It's not over. The lawyers who supported Prop 8 are challenging the injunction, the lifting of the injunction, saying it only applies to plaintiff couples, the two couples that were allowed to marry under the court decision.
When Prop 8 was passed by the voters, outlawing same-sex marriage after it had been legalized by the California Supreme Court, two couples were found who went into court to challenge Prop 8 and say this is unconstitutional, federally we should get rid of this. So when the courts have decided up the line, the federal courts, and then the Supreme Court decided not to take the case, or not to decide the case because of lack of standing from the right wing, the decision went back down to the district court, which had decided in favor of these couples, and the right wing is now arguing, okay, you won. Prop 8 doesn't apply, but only for these two couples. And so now we're back in court saying, no, it applies to everybody in the state. And the deciding factor, first they wanted to stop all the marriages.
And the
while
California Supreme Court said no, go ahead with the weddings, but we will look at the issues.
And the right wing said, all right, so it should just be these two couples. But it turns out that Vaughn Walker, the district court judge, now retired, now out gay, who wrote the now ruling decision on Prop 8, outlawing it, his injunction against it being enforced was specifically directed to the governor, the attorney general, and the county clerk. So even though there were only two couple plaintiffs in the case, the decision applies to all these statewide officials.
And there is some dispute, at least in their minds, about whether county clerks work, are under the jurisdiction of the governor or not. But that's all being worked out.
Yeah, I think actually the county clerks may be under the jurisdiction of either the Attorney General or the Secretary of State.
They're all on our side.
Well, they're all subject to what we have to say.
Well, at least the right wing is doing everything it can to preserve traditional marriage if they can.
Well, they are going. The court will take some briefs on this and will make further decisions. But there's also a question about whether the California Supreme Court should be hearing any of this, because it was a case decided by the federal district court, and that may have taken it out of the California Supreme Court's jurisdiction anyway. So the right wing is going down fighting, but it looks like they are going down.
Well, good news in Pennsylvania, where the Attorney General there, Kathleen Kane, Kane, will not defend the state on the lawsuit against the law that limits marriage to man-woman couples. She's a Democrat. The governor, Tom Corbett, is a Republican, and he has an office of counsel that is expected to defend the law or is defending
hasn't
the law.
announced yet.
Hey, get on the stick there.
Well, when we had James Essex here last week, he was fresh off a press conference in Pennsylvania where the ACLU had announced that it was filing suit against the Pennsylvania law in trying to bring same-sex marriage to Pennsylvania. So then that's why the Pennsylvania Attorney General stood up and said, I agree with the ACLU. This law is unconstitutional. Same-sex couples should be allowed to marry. Just look at what the Supreme Court said in their reasoning on the DOMA case. You should not be able to do this. So the right wing is, of course, attacking her for not doing her job, but it's the same old argument that applied with the Department of Justice. They are enforcing the law,
Right.
but she will not defend the law in court.
So let me understand something. Pennsylvania is one of these states that didn't pass a constitutional amendment against same-sex marriage.
Well, they have whatever, a law,
They have a law.
I guess. Okay.
So in this case, they're in state court
Yes.
to challenge this. Now, when they have a constitutional amendment...
Maybe they're in state court. They could be in federal court.
Well, but when you do have a constitutional amendment, don't you need to go to federal court to
Probably.
challenge it? Yeah, and all that kind of stuff.
Well,
I mean, how can a
don't
state
have all
court
the answers
overrule the
on-
Constitution?
Well,
of the state?
it could declare something in the state constitution unconstitutional. Prop
think?
8
I don't
was
know. I don't know about
declared
that.
unconstitutional by the federal court.
Yes, by the federal court.
Yes. So
think
maybe it's in the federal court, but whatever.
Well, anyway, they won't be talking about it at the Young Republican Convention. They refuse, even though more than 50% of young Republicans, and you can be a young Republican up until age 65. No, I don't know. I'm just kidding. It's actually 35, I think, though. But
Well, 35 is the new 12.
they supported the young people.
That was funny.
Oh, God. All right.
Yeah.
Go
All
ahead.
right. Our old pal Fred Karger, speaking of
Yes.
Republicans, who
Yes.
ran for president, outgay
Of
presidential.
the United States.
Exactly. You wonder how I'm going to get the All-Star Game into this show today. Well, the All-Star Game was
Couple of
held
ways.
at Citi Field. I'm going to tie all this together. The New York Mets Stadium this week. But it turns out that the Amway Corporation is opening its first U.S. store. God knows what they're doing around the world.
At Citi Field in New York.
How does this happen?
Yes, how did this happen? Well, we got a Chick-fil-A at NYU.
Exactly the same kind of
It happens
conundrum.
because we're not paying attention.
Evidently. But Fred has been on a campaign against Amway because the DeVos brothers are some of the biggest contributors to the National Organization for Marriage.
And they've
They
been
run this-
right-wing nuts for decades.
Totally, and they own Grand Rapids, Michigan. I've been there, and the first thing you see when you drive out of the airport are big billboards for Amway, and they run this pyramid scheme, which is Amway, to get all their money, and then they give it all to right-wing causes. And
They
product,
sell very fancy, what do you call it?
Perfume or-
No, cosmetics,
Cos-
at Bergdorf's and places like that, and
That's
Neiman
shocking,
Marcus and this
yeah.
kind of stuff. It's, what is it called?
I don't know.
Look, go on Fred's website.
So Fred held a demonstration at the All-Star Game this week to protest the fact that Citi Field is letting Amway open a store there.
Great.
Simultaneously,
Why didn't I get a release from him? I already covered him in the Gay City
I'm
News.
on his list. What's wrong with you?
Oh, no.
He was a guest on this show.
I was a guest at his apartment.
Major League Baseball, meanwhile, even while Citi Field is allowing the opening of this Amway store, put out a statement saying that they are announcing a new code of conduct.
Now, this is with the Players Association
Yes.
in conjunction, so the union is there too.
Code of conduct, training sessions, complaint system, all about non-discrimination.
Strengthening the protections based on sexual orientation.
Yeah.
And the fact that they announced it right before the All-Star game was pretty significant. You
Yeah.
have the National Press Corps there and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
Even if Amway is giving all their baseball profits to the National Organization for Marriage.
Right.
In Illinois, where we're still waiting to see whether the legislature will go ahead and pass a marriage equality law, they came right up to the edge and then hesitated. you
But
know.
we were told that sponsors were fleeing the vote.
Yeah, well, one house passed it, the other house was right on the verge, and then they withdrew it. And meanwhile, we've got a court case there that's been sitting there, and we're waiting to see what's happening with that.
Which also public officials won't defend.
So, Illinois Unites for Marriage, which is a coalition of all the LGBT groups and allies who are pushing marriage, has now ramped up a new campaign. They've hired a campaign manager. They're going to spend $2 million. They're hiring 15 to 20 grassroots organizers. They have a field strategy going around the state. And they say in the next 113 days, which is till the end of the current session, they are going to put out this massive field effort to convince these legislators to go ahead and pass a marriage
you
law.
know, that's grassroots lobbying, and it can work.
Yeah. And we have talked about giving up on southern states at the moment, but the Campaign for Southern Equality is going ahead with their campaign, and this week they were all over Mississippi sending couples into marriage bureaus asking for licenses in Jackson, Mississippi, Tupelo, Gulfport, Hattiesburg.
It's called the We Do campaign, and you can read about it.
Poplarville.
Yeah, you can read about it at southernequality.org.
Yeah.
The polling in Mississippi, 55% oppose same-sex marriage in Mississippi, but that's down from 86% when they passed a measure banning it in 2004.
I think it's fantastic.
It is fantastic.
And hallelujah that people are down there working on
Well,
this.
there's other data coming out of Mississippi. 64% support anti-discrimination legislation, and 70% support protection from bullying in schools. Watch out for that other 30%.
All right, shall we try to show them our video of the week?
Yes,
The
we should.
tearjerker.
Well, it is. Get some tissues ready
Yeah.
for this. This
So-
is a gay couple.
John and Jim, been together for 20 years, living in Ohio. John develops ALS,
within the last year.
Lou Gehrig's disease, and is not in good shape.
Right.
But they live in Ohio, and they decide they want to be married. So they start talking publicly about this, and people through Facebook donate enough money for them to get a medical private plane trip to Baltimore, to Maryland, where marriage is legal between same-sex couples, and where one of them has an aunt who has gotten herself legally allowed to perform marriages. And there on the tarmac in Baltimore, they get married.
Yeah.
And this is a long local coverage piece of it. And
9.5 minutes, but stay with it, please.
it's really good.
About getting married, and we never ever felt it would be anything more than symbolic because of the nature of our country.
In essence, it doesn't matter to us what Ohio says at this point because we know that isn't going to change. We still want our government to say, you matter, you exist. And your relationship of 20 years, 1 year, whatever it is, matters as much as anyone else's.
We're now getting federal recognition, and that's the impetus to make it happen because we're tax-paying citizens of the United States. And that federal recognition really helps me feel like a citizen.
When we decided we wanted to go to Maryland, I asked hospice to start doing some research to see what they could work out, knowing that they know how to deal with patients like John who have medical needs and transporting them. So I asked them to work on finding out what they could as how we could get to Maryland.
Had the Supreme Court made this decision 1 year ago, this would have been as simple as us taking a trip because I could still walk. It's the progression for me of the ALS is it's just compounded everything.
That requires a charter jet or a charter plane to get us there safely, to limit, again, the physical impact on John. And it's not an inexpensive proposition. And we want to make it happen, but it's a lot of money to spend.
I don't live in a world of regret, but I sure wish we were a year in the past.
Me too. I'm excited. I'm thrilled. I can't believe it's happening. So we'll fly to Baltimore International Airport and park at the private air terminal, and John's Aunt Paulette is going to marry us. Through the wonders of social media, I posted something on Facebook asking my family and friends, hey, any ideas, any connections, without prompting multiple messages of people offering to help pay.
For you from Crossroads.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you, Jen.
And much love from Leanne.
One last check. Make sure I have the all-important marriage license.
Forget it.
There it is.
Yay.
Today is a momentous day, not only in the lives of two of the most loving and special men I have ever known, also in the lives of all who know, love, and respect them, and in the larger sense, for those Americans who have waited to be recognized as equal under the law and in matters of the heart. When I obtained ordination and license to marry people, I called my nephew John and told him I would go anywhere, anytime, to officiate at his and Jim's marriage. He and Jim both said no. They were married to each other in their eyes, but that they would not take part in a wedding ceremony until the law of the land declared that they were equal to other couples. Minutes after the Supreme Court decisions on June the 26th, I received an email from Jim stating that my services might be needed. I wept bittersweet tears. 26 months ago, John was diagnosed with ALS. Since then, the amazing relationship between John and Jim has become even closer, even more devoted, even more loving. And it was pretty damn great before John became ill.
We met for the first time. My life didn't change. Your life didn't change. We met a second time. Still nothing changed. Then we met a third time, and everything changed. As you recently said, it was love at third sight. And for the past 20 years, 6 months and 11 days, it's been love at every sight.
Now for the official vows. John and Jim, you're all ready. I was going to say take each other's hand, but I don't think you've let go. Jim, you have the rings.
Yes.
The wedding ring is in the shape of a circle and is a symbol of the unending continuity of life and our place in it. Jim, place the ring on John's hand and say after me, with this ring, I thee wed.
With this ring, I thee wed.
John, help guide the ring onto Jim's hand and repeat after me.
Put it on upside down.
Good. With this ring, I thee wed.
With this ring, I thee wed.
John Montgomery Arthur, do you, continuing from this day, take James Robert Obergefell to be the love of your life, your eternal partner, your husband?
I do.
James Robert Obergefell, do you, continuing from this day, take John Montgomery Arthur to be the love of your life, your eternal partner, your husband?
I do.
In witness of those present, in the loving thoughts of the many people who wish they could have been with us today, in the spirit of loved ones who have come before, by license granted to me by law, and with the respect of the law of our great land, I now pronounce you husband and husband, forever intertwined partners. May love and goodwill be with you forever. Let us all rejoice. I love you very much.
Love you. Thank you so very much.
I love you. You're beautiful. You're beautiful. I'm so glad you too.
And thank you for including the word damn.
Oh, thanks.
I'm overjoyed, in love, and so thankful that Paulette could marry us, and just thankful that we could make this happen. Just happy. That's all I can say.
I'm overjoyed. I'm very proud to be an American and able to openly share my love for the record. And I feel like the luckiest guy in the world.
How could you watch that and not support this?
I think it's really moving and really shows the importance of this to people and how it really is about commitment and love. And
We want it
it's
shown in
terrific.
Cameroon.
Yes, and in Illinois, as you pointed out.
Yes.
And one of the people who helped pass the marriage law in Maryland, which allowed John and Jim to marry, was Maryland delegate Heather Miser, who has just announced that she's running for governor next year.
A lesbian from Montgomery County.
40
she's
years old.
in the assembly since 06 only. She'd be the first woman governor and the first out lesbian or gay person. It's a crowded field to succeed Martin O'Malley.
She's an underdog, but she is
No, it's a crowded
not-
field. Maybe she's got a chance.
Absolutely, and she's well liked and respected, and seen to be a terrific candidate.
Yep.
So keep her in your thoughts.
Yes.
And your old pal Jim McGreevy has a new job.
He and I have made up,
I know, that's why I say it that way.
but I'm disappointed to see he's taking a government job. Stay out of that stuff, Jim.
Well, the reason you like him is because he's been working with women in prison
Yes.
to get them jobs.
Yes.
And therefore, the mayor of Jersey City, New Jersey, has appointed ex-governor Jim McGreevy the head of the Job Commission for
Okay.
the town. Well,
I hope he does.
We'll keep our fingers crossed on that
Staying
one.
on outgate politicians, the Seattle Times has endorsed outstate Senator Ed Murray for mayor. The primary there is August 6th in Seattle. He is going to marry his partner, Michael Shiosaki, on August the 10th.
Ed Murray's always been a very good and popular politician in the state of Washington, and he was very instrumental in the passing of marriage equality there and is trying to go on to bigger things.
Now, speaking of mayors,
Yes.
here in New York, they named the Queensboro Bridge after closeted Mayor Ed Koch, who subsequently died. This was only 5 months ago, but now Council Member Peter Vallone Jr. wants to rescind the honor.
I was so happy to see that story.
Well, he doesn't
that
want...
really made my week.
Well, what he said was, some of this is like the Queensboro Bridge. This is our bridge.
Yeah.
You wouldn't do this to the Brooklyn Bridge. You wouldn't rename it for somebody,
especially
for
for
anybody.
a guy who insisted, even though he was the mayor of the whole city, that all he really cared about was Manhattan, and he wanted to be buried in Manhattan. And all
Well,
this.
I don't know. I mean,
That was part of Vallone's reasoning.
Ed Koch was, of course, a Manhattan congressman from the Village.
Yeah.
But he pitched his whole mayoralty to Central Queens and to Archie Bunker territory, which it was then. Now it's not Archie
Yes.
Bunker territory. Queens has changed quite a bit.
A lot.
It's the most multicultural borough
Yeah.
probably in the world.
Well, I would be happy to join any campaign to get Ed Koch's name off anything.
Well, that's how Chris
But-
Quinn got his endorsement
Well,
for mayor.
trust me, in New York, none of us pay attention to any of those names anyway, and they
Right,
fade into
the Robert Kennedy
obscurity.
Bridge is
Oh,
the Triborough
please.
Bridge, et cetera,
And I
et cetera, et
liked
cetera.
him. But Chris Quinn's in a little trouble herself, just a tiny
This
bit.
is the out lesbian speaker of the city council who was a candidate for mayor.
Exactly, against Anthony Weiner and the whole crew. But now people are raising questions about her travel expenses and were they reported correctly and were they repaid correctly. And so there's a little brouhaha there.
Sure.
But Anthony Weiner's the one who's really in trouble.
There's a brouhaha in Ottumwa, Iowa schools. They had scheduled the Laramie Project for this year for performances by the high school students there, and then they canceled it because they said that it was the intensity of the adult subject material. And the kids are really baffled because their principal was really supposed to be dedicated to anti-bullying stuff. And now they say they want family-friendly shows.
Yes.
I urge the kids to rehearse the show and do it in the street if you have to.
Well, and does it have to be mutually exclusive? Can't they do 76 trombones?
Yeah.
In addition
Whatever.
to what's the name of that? Why am I blanking?
Music
on-
Man.
Thank you. Speaking of,
Well-
that was Gary, Indiana.
No.
But our last mayoral story comes from San Diego, where the newly elected Democratic mayor of San Diego, Bob Filner, who ran against a right-wing, out-gay Republican and won, and everybody loved him. Well, it turns out he's a big sexual harasser,
Cereal.
really bad.
Yep.
And
Oh, and he says, I need help.
I need help.
You need to resign.
Well, that's what people are asking. But he wrote a letter to the head of the LGBT Pride Parade saying, I'm not showing up this year because I want to save you the embarrassment of having to deal with me when I'm in the midst of this huge scandal.
Well,
So-
we had a little kerfuffle scandal in New York. They were going to. There was a private group that puts historic plaques up, and they were going to put one on the Stonewall Bar.
Yeah.
These are these round enamelized porcelain plaques and things, but they didn't invite any Stonewall veterans to participate either in the writing of it or the planning of it or anything. So people started to ask questions about this. It's run by this socialite.
People initials Andy Hum.
I give credit to Bill Dobbs for making me do this.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't gonna do the story, but I did, and they just canceled the ceremony at the last minute. But it raises this whole thing about, whether it's an open public process and how we dedicate historic buildings or whatever.
Oh, this is a very private group. They had nothing to do with even the official Landmark Society.
Right.
They just go around doing whatever they want.
Stick and play might stick and watch out, folks, they might stick a plaque on you. And you won't like it.
Anything is possible.
Well, I mean, what about what's going on at Outserve SLDN?
Well, now they're closing their doors.
On July 31st, and
yeah.
Allison Robinson has officially resigned as of July the 12th.
Last-
They're bankrupt.
Yeah, last week we thought they were headed for some nice negotiated settlement, but now all that's left is the website. They will still be a membership organization. They'll provide information and referrals to their members.
Well, they won their big issue, and that's what happens.
Yeah, all this is evidently because they have no money and they can't fundraise because Don't Ask, Don't Tell is dead. Now, there's still a lot of issues in the military.
And transgender folks are still not
That's one of the big issues.
Admitted
People being able to serve who are transgender or getting appropriate benefits as veterans, all of this, but they cannot maintain an office. The D.C. City Council, however, has simplified their requirements for people who are transgender or transsexual getting a new birth certificate. They no longer require proof of surgery or a court order, just a letter from a licensed healthcare provider who will signify that you're living in a new gender identity. And then they'll give you a new birth certificate.
In San Francisco, we have a picture of her. We mourn the death of transgender activist Jazzy Collins, dead at 54. Worked on tenants' rights, workers' rights, trans rights, aging and health issues. Came to San Francisco in 1988, became an activist in 2002 over development issues in San Francisco, and then became a very visible presence on a lot of other things. Was HIV positive,
Right.
But dead at 54.
In Chicago, a traditional HIV services organization, Chicago House, has opened a trans life center. It's going to provide housing for 9 people, medical care, legal help, job support, and they had a really big ceremony to open this place. Lana Wachowski, the transgender movie director who did
Matrix.
the Matrix films, was there.
With her brothers.
Yep. Representative Jan Schakowsky, who you've seen all the time on TV, was there. A HUD official was there. This was a big deal. So congratulations to Chicago House for opening this Trans Life Center. Lambda Legal Defense here in New York has created a transgender rights project and hired Drew Levasseur, who's an attorney, as the director. And the Empire State Pride Agenda here, the New York political group, has started a transgender rights project. And there's been notice this week that the EEOC, the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is headed by the out lesbian Hy Feldblum, who's a fantastic activist.
For decades.
Really fantastic. And she's been looking for ways to make progress, particularly on transgender rights. And they have settled a couple of cases in the last few months where they have been able to define transgender or transsexual discrimination as sex discrimination.
Title VII.
Title VII of the Civil Rights Act.
But they don't have a definitive. They have their own ruling, but they don't have a ruling from the Supreme Court on this. So there could be.
No, but this is expected to be translatable. Perhaps they found the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms liable for their crime lab refusing to hire someone who they said they had hired someone who then announced that he was transitioning, and they immediately said, sorry, we're not giving you the job after all. And they've been held liable for that. And then a federal contractor allowed ongoing physical and verbal harassment of a transgender woman.
Now, if they can do this for transgender folks, why can't they do it for just on the basis of gay and lesbian? I mean, isn't that also
Because-
sex discrimination, essentially stepping
Well,
out of your sex role and stuff like
That's
that?
been a long-standing
It
argument.
didn't work in the Supreme Court this time.
But clearly, these people are being harassed for their gender expression or gender identity.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about sort of gender manifestations,
Okay.
it's a little more subtle in lesbian.
We
and
shouldn't
gay.
go through the show without talking about the verdict in the George Zimmerman Trayvon Martin
Yes.
case. 35 LGBT groups issued a statement in solidarity with those seeking to continue to fight for justice, civil rights, and that horrible word closure, because there's never going to be closure on this until we end racism in this society. You know, they're asking the Justice Department to pursue every option, and of course they are. But it's a frightening thing. Not frightening for me as a white man, but my God, I mean, the idea that you've just empowered every nutcase in this country to approach
to carry
people of color.
concealed guns and to shoot at will, basically.
And you say there may be a gang along
Well,
this.
there's a very interesting offshoot to this week, and that you remember this woman, Rachel Gentel, who was on the phone with Trayvon shortly before he was murdered. She appeared on the Piers Morgan show on CNN after this verdict came in, and she was talking about her analysis of this, and she said, you know, Trayvon, you think George Zimmerman had a right to stand his ground and felt threatened and Trayvon had attacked him, but Trayvon was the one who felt pursued and in danger, because here is this stranger, this older man, pursuing him through this housing development or whatever. And was Zimmerman a rapist? Was he an attacker, a thief?
Right.
You know,
Absolutely.
someone who was coming after him? And it is not ununderstandable that Trayvon would lash out at this guy,
Sure.
assuming that's even what happened. We have only George Zimmerman's
Right.
word for it, and he wouldn't even get on the stand and say it. They sort of said it secondhand.
Well, he may have to get on the stand later. But
He very well may. But this whole idea that Trayvon felt at risk
sure.
for either sexual or physical attack
It's
is
horrifying.
something that has really
It's
totally been left out as an
it's
angle
just
in this
horrifying.
case.
Just horrifying. Okay.
And there's also a terrible story of violence from Atlanta where a very highly honored lesbian police officer, Crystal Parker, was evidently murdered by her girlfriend of 5 years, Danielle Parker, who had taken her name, because Crystal broke up with her.
Yeah.
And so now we have, Crystal was named the Officer of the Year last year, active in the LGBT community, dead, you know, partner murder.
And we're basically almost out of time here.
Oh, we certainly are. I'm sorry. I have lost track of
But,
time.
well, you were telling us some very interesting stories. Should we run through? Here are our credits.
In
We'll do
30
it next
seconds?
week.
Yeah.
Read President Obama's executive order on AIDS and prevention and care.
GMHC Mayoral Candidates Forum on HIV and AIDS next Tuesday, 5:30. GMHC 446 West 33rd Street at 5:30 Tuesday.
And although he wasn't gay, certainly sorry about Corey Monteith over at Glee.
Certainly a gay-friendly guy. We will see you next week. Sorry I lost track of the time.
Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.